Today we have a super exciting guest today, a longtime friend of John and I's, and also a fellow creative, Scott Lynch. Scott, thank you for being on the podcast today.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, of
It's
course.
always a pleasure. Yeah.
Right. Yeah, we met Scott years ago. He used to live in Colorado, then he moved to Chicago. We shared some studio space for some time. We got super close on some projects where he helped direct some commercials for us, and we just kept in touch over the years. But I want to pass it over to you, Scott, and maybe just walk us through your, a brief background on kind of what it is you do.
So I got my start in traditional filmmaking. So did a lot of editing. Started off. Actually started off. My first job, I think, was working with a car photographer. I'm from Michigan originally, so I worked for a car photographer in Detroit, which was cool because I got to learn sort of how to light and how to really kind of just like compose a shot. But then I've had sort of jobs all throughout in pretty much every facet of the industry. Did wedding videos early on, as many people do. Did music videos for low budget music videos for bands. Met a lot of people that way and sort of cut my teeth. And then my career kind of took off in a slightly different direction as it often kind of does. I think originally I wanted to be a feature film director, but I think where my path sort of ended up leading was to doing more documentary work. So I was involved with doing some of the really early web series when YouTube was kind of in its very infancy. So kind of learning how to develop content that was being released, and using that material as a way to support a business or to market an idea. So I was kind of involved in those kinds of things. And then I moved out to Colorado, got involved in the music industry, which was just kind of happen chance. I just happened to meet some people that were already working in that industry out there. And there was opportunities there to do interesting work and work with artists. So I produced a lot of music work, a lot of music festivals, a lot of music documentaries. Got to be on a lot of cool stages and meet some really cool people. But then I kind of got to a point where I also did some like work in television. But kind of felt that I, in a sense, kind of got like a little bored with what I did. And so in 2016, virtual reality started to become a platform that was opening up. The technology was kind of coming to a point where it was actually possible for people outside of research to start using it as a creative tool. And I really just fell in love with the medium. And after some self-reflection, realized that a lot of the work that I've been trying to do with traditional filmmaking was actually better. Some of the work that I've been trying to do with traditional filmmaking was actually better suited for VR. I've always been really interested in this idea of trying to give somebody the realistic experience of what something was like. So if I was at an event, what does that event feel like? What is, or if I'm doing a documentary, like what does that place feel like? What that other country or this other location, these other characters. I just felt like VR helped me communicate the things I wanted to communicate with that kind of work better than traditional film did. So once I kind of realized that, I shifted my career to focus on virtual reality because it was new, it was exciting. Nobody, in 2016, very few people were dabbling in it, and so they kind of just felt like this, this wide open world of a new thing to explore and a new thing to just kind of push myself to learn something new. And that's really just kind of opened up a whole other Pandora's box in some ways of different problems and different skill sets that I've needed to learn. So it's been interesting. I've had to like relearn a lot, just reteach myself all these different things, different programs, different ways of working, different ways of thinking. But yeah, it's been very exciting. And now that virtual reality is also starting to shift into a newer form called virtual production. And virtual production sort of takes the benefits of game engines, and which are generally used for 3D games, but reutilizing them for narrative purposes. So, for people that are familiar with The Mandalorian or some of the other uses of virtual production, you'll build like these giant LED walls and you'll project essentially like a CGI scene onto the background. And so instead of having to build like a giant set, you might just build that virtually and project that onto essentially giant TV screens. And then through the camera, it all looks correct and you get proper lighting. So I've kind of started going into like this whole other sort of rabbit hole of technology, and sort of merging some of my experience from filmmaking and my experience in virtual reality, and it's all kind of swirling in this kind of this new medium of stuff that you can do now. So it's been kind of a weird journey, but it's but it's been fun. So
yeah, no, I remember first meeting you. We were connected through music, and then we got to know each other, and then we shared space, and you were really heavy into VR. We'd look over, you had your goggles on, you're setting up your tracking cameras for your sensors. But I feel like it's, the people I'm connected with personally, I feel like no one really is really doing virtual production, but you are, and I know you kind of created a group. But I'd love to talk about like the transition. Like, is there a big learning curve going from traditional video right into virtual production?
It's a lot different. In some ways it's similar, but it kind of depends on what your experience level is. Like I would say if you've worked in special effects or VFX, or you've worked on some larger commercial type projects, you might not find the transition to be that jarring. If you're going sort of from a more documentary or indie world, then there's a lot more to learn. Because you're working on a set, you have to have a larger crew of people to sort of do these types of productions at the moment. Things will change over the years, but at the moment, you're looking at relatively large crews, which might not be, so that aspect of it might be the more foreign part for certain creatives, because it's not just a guy and a camera and a green screen type thing. It's a lot more advanced, because you have to be working with people that understand the whole visual effects pipeline. So how to do 3D models, but also how to optimize them for game engines.
Wow.
And so there's just a lot more additional steps. And then the other thing that's kind of part of that too is, due to COVID and also just due to the need for a very specific talent to do certain roles, is a lot of the workflow has been virtualized in a sense. So, which I think is actually, like, those kinds of aspects I think are going to trickle down a lot into, the more indie space, or maybe the corporate space as well. But, there's now this ability to use virtual technology to have your production studio completely virtualized. Like, you don't need a physical space anymore. It's like you can have an editor in one location, you can have your visual effects person in another location, you can have your producer in a third location, you could even have your actors in mocap suits wherever they happen to live, and you can bring all those people into a central location using servers and using some kind of like a Dropbox and steroids kind of file sharing systems to keep everybody in sync at all times. So there's a lot of actually really interesting things happening, like workflow wise, that I think filmmakers and creatives and other business people should be starting to consider, because there is a lot at the current moment. It's becoming way more possible to not need to have all of your resources, people and equipment in the same, say, physical location. You can virtualize that. So it also opens a lot of creative possibilities where you don't you can hire that person from another country that you want to work with for a particular project, and you can, you don't have to like worry as much about like having to physically, move them or like,
Right.
relocate them or anything, and their families and stuff. So I think those kinds of I think it's interesting. I think it's a little bit of a canary in the coal mine where it's starting to show like how the future of work will be a little bit more distributed.
Right.
And you might have companies that don't necessarily have like a central office that everybody has to go to. So I think that
Right.
there's a lot of like interesting workflow things that so those aspects of it I'm learning a lot. A lot of it has to do with a lot of it's very rooted in sort of the software industry.
Mhm.
So that wasn't something I was familiar with before, but starting to learn like, okay, well, how do software companies build software, and
Right.
how do they keep a team of 1,000 people, 1,000 programmers all working on the same project, and not step on each other's toes. So I think there's a lot of lessons to be learned. So those kinds of things will be potentially challenging for, or at least like new concepts for people to learn.
Right.
But I think there's a lot of benefit in being able to kind of take some of these new ideas and apply them to the film world, which hasn't really evolved. Besides like digital cinema, like cameras going from film to digital, it hasn't dramatically evolved in the way things are done. But I think we're starting to see that change now.
Yeah, no, I agree. I feel like there will be this new standard, right? Like I saw something like in 2026, like psych walls are just gonna be dust. It's gonna be virtual production is kind of the new standard for in studio productions. But can you like I'm just curious, like it's kind of a new wave of technology. There's definitely a learning curve. You definitely have to be pretty involved in whether it's the software, but on a client perspective, like how would you go about like selling this idea to a client that maybe is interested in possibly using virtual production but maybe has no idea what it is?
Well, I think at the moment it really probably depends on the client.
Mhm.
You know, unless a project is at a certain level, it might not make sense to try to do virtual production at this moment. So I think that is a part of the conversation that might not be happening a lot right now, mostly because people are very interested in this and they want to try to use it. But there's a lot of unknowns about, when is that the right choice for a particular project. I think the clients that will get the most benefit out of it right now is clients that need to film something that is at a hard to reach location, for example. Say you're shooting a promo video or a concert video, or not a concert video, a corporate video. And one example might be you need to shoot at an airport. You need a scene at an airport, and traditionally your options are try to rent an airport, which you can't unless so often it becomes trying to build a fake version of it like on a set somewhere, and it doesn't usually look that realistic. It's a little because it's never going to look as big and open as say like a real airports are designed. But in using virtual production, you can actually, you know, for what you might spend on a physical set, you could build that in a virtual sense and film it on a virtual production stage and have it look much better for about the same cost.
Gotcha.
So, but if you're working on a project and you maybe aren't prepared to have the kind of budget to be able to say afford to build a set, perhaps virtual production at this moment is not quite the right solution. But there are, I think we'll start seeing some smaller, virtual production coming down from like these huge giant walls, because essentially like you have like these giant LED walls, and that's really it's just there's a lot of expense in renting those walls that
Mhm.
tens of thousands of dollars a day. Plus you got to have some pretty high end, like pretty much you have to have like sort of the you know the best computers that are possible to build, and you got to have several of them. And then you got to have people that can run all that, and then you got to have some pretty high end tracking systems, camera tracking systems to kind of track the camera position and the lens data. But for example, if you were shooting a television show and you needed, um, you know, let's say most of your television show happens in say in an office, but it, like for one scene, you're going to need to shoot in a desert or shoot at a beach or shoot at some sort of exotic location. And normally in a production, you would fly a whole crew out there and fly the cast. And so that takes several days. You're flying people first class, you got to put them up. So there's a lot of expenses often in a larger production with, say, going on location and filming something that's sort of out of the ordinary. But using virtual production, that's the kind of thing that you can easily shoot just in a day. Like, you've got people shooting the regular show on one stage, and then they come on over to the other stage. They shoot their beach scene that afternoon, because you've just put some sand down. You put a beach up on the background, or maybe they take a trip to Venice, or they take a trip to, really almost any different location. So when you have those kinds of projects, it at this point, those are sort of the ones that I think where virtual production makes sense. But I think in the next few years, and this is something why people should kind of pay attention to it, is especially if people want to do more polished. Say you are a part of a corporation and you want to do a big, say, shareholder event. Normally, you would put on a large production at a large conference center. So in that you're already probably prepared to, say, build some large projection walls or LED walls. You're going to be putting a lot of effort into, the staging of, say, a large corporate event, and then you have to have all the extra stuff that go with an event. You got to have all the logistics to bring all these people into your space, host them at a hotel and that kind of a thing. With virtual production, if you wanted to, say, do a virtual conference, you could then now do a very polished live stream of something similar, but do it in a way that looks more than just like people on a stage. You could do a lot more fancy things, like have your presenters in many different locations. Wow. You'll be able to bring up, say, presenters in their own their own Zoom windows, or perhaps even as virtual avatars, like within the space. Wow. So you could have a different presenter, like on a green screen in a different city, who's able to present without needing to travel, without needing to, without needing to kind of host that person. You could just, set up a separate location in a different studio. And then that actually might give you access to a more variety of, say, keynote speakers. If right. If you could hire somebody who's not in the location, who doesn't have enough time to, say, travel to your conference and get set up for that morning's thing. Perhaps a virtual conference will allow you to virtually bring them in. They can just spend the few hours that they need to do their presentation, and then their commitment is kind of over. So I think you'll probably start seeing virtual production used a lot in those sort of cases. And then you'll probably also see it for people that are, like, say, if you are, say, maybe you're a feeature filmmaker or an indie filmmaker, or music, maybe you're making a music video, and you want to do one location, or you want to, you sort of want to film in one location film in one day, but you want to have a bunch of locations. A virtual production might be a more economical way to shoot the same music's, performance in a bunch of different locations, or do a bunch of kind of extra special effects with things with time and light that would be very difficult to do practically. Right. So I think you'll start seeing a lot of creative uses for people using it in that way over the next year or so. But because of some of the expenses involved, it's generally why it'll probably at these early stages, it's going to be more limited towards the sort of the people in that middle to high end right. type of production. But over time, it'll become a more prominent way of doing production. So I definitely think that I definitely encourage people to start looking at it and start kind of wrapping their head around what it'll take. And so hopefully in a year or two, they'll be ready to start creating projects using it.
I feel like it's one of those, it's like people investing in a stock, right? If like you believe it, give it a few years, it's gonna go. And I feel like with virtual production, like I've seen some commercial shoots of other accounts I follow where they're shooting car commercials, and there is a film crew, right? And they bring in, I've seen, they bring in trees and try to make a beach feel, kind of how you said. But I want to talk like in terms of like a film crew, like the standard. You have a director, a DP, camera assistant, AC. When it comes to these virtual productions in a commercial sense, let's say we're shooting in a space that has virtual LED walls. Would you say the crew is kind of like, are there different elements that are different from standard video? Like for me, right? I love to shoot. Is it something that I would be able to pick up as a videographer under someone's direction to film, or is it really kind of like a lot more elements and just kind of filming on this LED wall?
I mean, it's going to be a little bit more complicated than a normal. It really kind of just depends on your role. I think camera operators often will find it pretty similar, because when you're looking through the camera, it'll feel like a pretty real film set. The way it looks through the camera is actually, that's the most realistic version of what it looks like. So I feel like the camera operator, as far as being able to light the scene, as far as like the way that they might want to like film a location, most of that is the same. Where it starts to, and I think directing for the most part is very, very similar. Producing, all the same challenges are kind of there. Where it starts to really kind of get different is in the art department. The art department, normally they might be the ones building a set or dressing a location that's already there. And often on many projects, art department is usually, they have some pre-production. They're having some meetings with the director and with the producer. They're finding props and and that kind of a thing. And then they're just sort of bringing it to set and dressing the set however they're supposed to. With virtual production, their job extends, I think, a little bit deeper into pre-production. Because you have this ability to, so one of the things you can do is, like, as a team, when you're building a concept, like your director, your producer, your DP, and your art department head, before anything is shot, while you're essentially storyboarding the scenes, one of the things that you can do is have everybody do what we call a virtual scout. And so, say you're shooting on a mountain location, a virtual mountain location. So somebody will build sort of a, maybe a low quality version, but maybe not, of what the mountain should look like. Someone's got to build that in 3D. But before you are actually on the stage, everybody in your key production group can put on a VR headset. You can all visit that location together. And then you can actually discuss, okay, well, do we want to shoot on this part of the mountain, or should we shoot over here? Should we change the sky to light from this angle as opposed to this angle? Do we need to add some additional rocks here in the foreground? Because like the DP's like, I want to get a nice low shot from this angle. And, they're not looking at anything that is physical at that point. It's really just pixels in a headset. But you can, because you can see everything, you can kind of start to lay out, okay, well, it's like going on a traditional location scout where you might go look at a place. So it's like, oh, I'm actually, maybe we'll want to film from this location, or let's put up a tracking shot that does this. And so I think what's cool is that you can start having those conversations really early on in the development of the concept, and at very low cost. You don't have to have an art department build a whole mountain for real.
Right.
You know, it's, or you don't have to travel to a location for real. It's like you can, you know, maybe the mountain scene doesn't work, and you know, actually we'd be better shooting this on a beach. Fine, okay. What, throwing it like, okay, like load up the beach. Okay, now everybody let's look at the beach and like discuss what's needed. And you know, and for the art department, maybe that is you know, maybe they don't need to, maybe they only need to build a couple of things in the room and they don't need to build a whole set. Maybe they can build one physical prop, and then that prop can be scanned, and then you can put it digitally in the background so that you have more than one. So I think there's like a lot of things like that which are sort of new parts of the workflow that are different than things how things are. Like generally film is made very linearly. Yep. Somebody comes up with a plan, somebody tells somebody how to do the plan, and then you really only ever see it in its final form, like really on the day of shooting. That's the only thing where like all the elements come together.
Right.
But hopefully. Hopefully. And with virtual production, you kind of get to see like a pretty high quality version very early on in the process. And so really what the great benefit to creatives is that because you can see a pretty good version early on in your process, you also have the ability to iterate on that. So, you know, with any project, often what makes a really high quality polished product in the very end is your ability to sort of almost redo your work. So you kind of do it, you do a thing, and you discuss what works, what doesn't work, and then you fix what doesn't work, and you kind of iterate, and then you kind of have a discussion about that. And so virtual production allows you to iterate with a very small crew and a very relatively low costs to get to that final point, so that when you're actually on set and you're actually running, you know, filming scenes, that you're not probably spending a lot of time trying to work out, say, the logistics or the problems with a scene. Like presumably you've given yourself enough iteration time to work all those issues out before you're actually trying to film something. Right. So those tend to be like the real benefits to the workflow that I think people can start latching onto.
Yeah, no, I think what I'm interested in is, so that all makes sense, and I think it's almost like the client's like, hey, whatever you wish, we can make it happen, right? There's really no limitations. I think that's the really cool thing I'm taking away from virtual production. And yeah, there's a lot of steps to it, but it's like if the client wants to ride on a donkey in the desert somehow, you know, or have it in the foreground. I think what I'm interested in is, so you have the designers that are, I'm not sure if I know the terminology, but maybe modding out everything and getting everything built, right? So you get on set, if a client says, hey, you know, say you're on a beach, you know, hey, I didn't want the two chairs in the background. I kind of wanted more of like a longer landscaping spread. How easy is it to adjust? Or is that kind of like, you need to have those conversations beforehand? Is it plug and play where you have like a drop down of assets, like, oh, she wants another beach ball, we could drop that in? Or can you repurpose assets from different projects that now it's like, these are beach elements, these are mountain elements? Or is it very specific per project, would you say?
It's a little per project. Generally at this point, I would certainly suggest that you do as much of that work in the pre-production. That's sort of the idea behind being able to iterate, is that you can bring in your clients and then they can see sort of, you know, what they see is what they get. Right. And, you know, and this has been a challenge with productions and clients for, you know, as long as there's been clients, you know, trying to get them what they want. So some of that is just sort of, I think, managing expectations, you know, that sort of once you get to the shooting date, hopefully you're focusing on capturing the concepts and ideas that have already been established. But often in a lot of productions, because there hasn't been enough pre-production generally with the clients that are the decision makers, is that unfortunately sometimes the first time the client really gets a true idea of what it is that's filming is at the very end, you know, because they've only seen like some storyboards, or they've seen some images that have been comped together in Photoshop, and maybe they've seen some blueprints, but they haven't ever seen like the final thing. And so I think that's often where you get those conversations of, well, can we have this? Can we have that? At this point, unless that object already exists, that beach ball might take someone in a 3D art department, a day to make.
Right.
So if you don't have a beach ball and you want a beach ball, you can't just go to a store often and get it. There are becoming more digital prop stores, if you will, where you can start to purchase assets sort of digitally and then bring them into your project. And I think we'll see again more of that becoming available as this becomes a more more popular form of production. But at the moment, if you say you want something specific in a scene, that's something that usually needs to happen. Like the decision to have that thing should happen several, well advanced in sort of the pre-production stages of the project. So instead of like often if like, so kind of going back to like traditional filmmaking, like generally you would pre-produce something and then you would shoot it. And then there's like the classic, like, let's fix it in post. What we actually suggest now is that your post-production is actually very, in this kind of a setup, the post-production is usually pretty minimal because you're not generally, doing a green screen shot where you have to like replace the background and add in digital elements. And you still may do that depending on what it is you're shooting, but often a lot of the work that would be generally considered post-production work actually gets moved to the pre-production stage.
Nice.
which is a benefit because like your post-production team, your pre-production team they're all talking together. And so that's really what it's about. It's about collaborating early in the process so that when you get to production, that happens efficiently. And I think, so that's probably actually one of the biggest sort of changes in say a producer's mind or a client's mind of how the flow of the project will go is that it's really front loaded on the pre-production side. That's actually where most of the work happens. Mm-hmm. And most of the decisions happen. And then once you get to production, that's just sort of executing the ideas.
I love that.
And that's the most, and really, and ultimately that saves you money because, fixing things in post is expensive because you usually haven't planned for it.
Right.
And so that's really what it's about. It's trying to, be more efficient with a client's money, push their resources farther to either produce more content or produce like more polished content. And really make every dollar count more. And you can do that by front loading your production and your work on the pre-production side.
Yeah, I love the idea. I mean, I think pre-production, even we've had projects where like clients don't really want to get involved too much, and over trial and error, we've let that happen. Where like now post-production is kind of kicking us because we weren't thorough enough, or they didn't want to be involved, and they're just like, they get the vision once they see the video. Now they know what they want. And so I feel like, it may take more steps with virtual production, but I feel like it's weeding out all that I should have, or we could have, or I thought I wanted this. It's like, you saw these comps, you saw everything. And it's essentially gonna, make your editors happy. And that's like another thing I'm interested in is like the post-production part. So obviously you're still filming on traditional, I'm sure you're still filming on the same cameras you would be filming on traditional videos. So Reds, Alexas, whatever, right? Is the editing, would you say it's kind of the same? Like for an editor getting footage from a virtual production shoot, is it essentially should kind of just go right in line?
It should essentially just sort of be like for most editors and most productions, I would think it's actually, going to be mostly the same, except if they were like normally if they were doing like a special effects shot, they might have to edit their film together with a lot of green screen, mm-hmm. Without the elements actually in their video. It's like if there's a giant robot, right. The editor when they're first initially making their cut might not be able to see that robot, because it's just like a shot on a green screen or something. But now you might actually see, so the feet of the robot, or you might have those digital elements within your scene. Because really the idea is like once you push record on the camera, for the most part, you should be that sort of is final pixels, without obviously like color grading would still be a kind of an additional step, as it is with any project. But for the most part, the camera is sort of capturing everything you need. It's capturing the lighting, it's capturing the background, it's capturing the performance. And then, also the actors have they feel more like they're on location. They can look around, if they're in a park, they can see trees, if they're on a mountain, they kind of feel like they're on top of a mountain. And so I think a lot, as I've heard actors kind of talk about their experiences working on a virtual production set, they definitely feel it's easier for them to act when they understand the environment that they're supposed to be in, which is a little bit easier than other forms of kind of traditional, say, green screen production. So
yeah, no, I love that.
So there's certainly a lot of advantages there. But the editors I think will be mostly the same, except that they won't have to like send off footage to a post-production, like a special effects person to do something. They can, they'll have the footage that they want right there.
Wow. No, I think it's almost just, it's reinventing kind of our industry in a way. I talked to someone a few podcasts ago, or a few episodes, where they did a lot more FPV drones, and it was more like, the industry got stagnant, and like this new kind of way of filming drones has kind of emerged. And I feel like virtual productions kind of like videos kind of got stagnant with like studio production, and things changed, but also opportunity has come, and I feel like you're kind of spearheading the whole virtual production brigade, I guess, in my network. So I'm curious for any piece of advice for people that maybe are listening that are interested in learning more about virtual production, or have, want to get into that field. I'd love to hear what you have to say.
Yeah, well, there's as far as the industry is at the moment, most productions are using a game engine called Unreal Engine 4. That's primarily the engine that's used. There's also Unity, which is another game engine that's often used in VR, but for whatever reason has not been the more prominent engine. So they work more or less the same, but they're slightly different as kind of programs tend to be. But really, the best suggestion I would have is that you can download a game engine like Unreal for free, and you can simply start learning sort of just how it works with any new program or any new workflow. Being comfortable with using the tool and creating within the tool is sort of like the work that you need to be putting in to be able to use it. I don't know if anybody who's a creative who kind of remembers the first time they opened up Photoshop or opened up Premiere or Final Cut, and it was maybe you were in college, maybe you were in high school, or maybe you were later on in your career, and at first you're going to feel lost. You don't know where the buttons are, you don't know what they do, you don't know how to get the thing that you want to do to into the scene. And so I think really it's just kind of becoming familiar with the tool in just kind of like a practical sense. And so that's why I would recommend everyone to start. You can download Unreal Engine for free. There's no restrictions on it. You can actually start using it in virtual productions without a cost, even commercial projects. So getting used to new workflow is the most critical thing. So I think it really kind of just depends on where you're coming at it from an artist or as a creative, because one of the things it does too is that it does open up some new roles on set. So one of the new roles is what's generally called the world operator, and they're the person that's in charge of getting the digital scene that's being created in the game engine, and they're responsible for getting it up onto the walls and then doing any adjustments that might be required. Either say moving this, like wherever the center of the scene is, maybe if you're shooting in a large warehouse, maybe you don't want to shoot in the very center of the warehouse. Maybe you want to shoot in a corner. And so that person's in charge of essentially moving and rotating the world so that it's showing up on the screens as intended. Those people are usually involved in pre-production, but that's going to be a new role that, especially if you're people that are interested in getting into this world and want to maybe work on some higher end productions. There's a real lack of people that understand film, and are able to communicate with people in sort of like a, film people kind of have a certain way of talking and working, but that also understand how to use the game engine and how to operate that side of it. On many of the productions that I've been involved in with this technology, the only people that are like have that knowledge are like recent graduates of like coming out of like a program that teaches game design. And so a lot of them don't have the film knowledge, or and there's just like like productions want to hire these people and they want to pay them a lot of money because there's not very many of them that know how to do it. So I think especially over the next couple of years, there's, for people that want to specialize in something particular, if you learn how to be a world operator for a virtual production set, you will probably be very busy working on all sorts of commercials, feature films, television shows. So if you're looking for a way into those environments, this might be a really good way to kind of get your foot in the door and start working on those kinds of projects. So yeah, it's really about just kind of giving yourself that experience. So if you're sitting around and you have some time to learn, again, it'll take time to learn and it'll take time to become proficient in it. But there's a lot of resources. There's a lot of Discord communities that are very helpful. There's a lot of YouTube videos that different people are putting out that you can learn how to do different aspects of the engine. You're going to want to learn programming a little bit, to at least a certain extent, to be able to kind of facilitate some certain, like, kind of the ways these worlds are built.
Yeah.
So there will be some new skills that will be required, but so we started a virtual production group here in Chicago, called the Chicago Virtual Production Group back in October, because we were starting to realize that there was a lot of people interested in this, but not a lot of, there wasn't like a local community around that. But even in just sort of the 6 months that group has been around, the members of that group that I've seen start applying their knowledge and just practicing, when they have time on working in the engine, maybe they're building a house scene, like a kitchen for a commercial, or they're working on there's some other people are working on more environments, maybe they're realistic environments or others. And even in just a couple of months of them practicing, I've seen them kind of go from very beginners to much more advanced in their ability to make something that works at a professional level. So, I think it's really just about applying yourself and learning and really just jumping in and learning a new skill. Just like when you picked up a camera for the first time, it's it's a little daunting and you're not going to be a very good shooter, but if you shoot every day for 6 months, like, you're going to get better. I think the same rules apply here.
Yeah, no, I think, the whole world operator, I mean, that's, to me, I'm like, that's a golden opportunity. A young kid out of college or someone just looking to get into a new field, right? I feel like that's like almost, you become kind of the eyes and ears. You're like the kingpin in charge. But I want to kind of recircle back on this last one. I always just ask, like, how can people connect with you? I know you have started that club. I would love for you to kind of maybe throw out some links or just ways that if people are interested in virtual production, they could, connect with you, Scott.
So the group that I just mentioned, at the moment, it's open to Chicago-based creatives or Illinois-based creatives. It's the goal is really, so it's a volunteer group. It's free to join. Membership doesn't cost a thing. It's called our website is chicagovirtualproduction.com. And they can, people can sign up for our mailing list and reach us, our direct email, for the group that when I started with Ross Floyd, who is another local Chicago creative, and it's an open group. We're currently meeting weekly. And really, it's about sort of giving people a little bit of a community. All of us are still working from home at this point in time, for the most part. So, being able to connect with people and see a friendly face and get a little bit of encouragement is really kind of what the goal, what the group is trying to give for people. Encourage them, or maybe help them solve a problem that they've had that week while they were working on a project. The kind of, I guess, the ultimate goal of this particular group is to build a good ecosystem within the Chicago community, or the local community here, for doing virtual productions. As I kind of mentioned earlier, these kinds of projects do require quite a few different skill sets. And so early on, we kind of realized that the community, the local community here, was going to need a talent pool of people that understood how this technology worked and could implement it at a professional level. And we've kind of felt the best way to do that was to build a group that's encouraging to share best practices, that it's encouraging, people to, helping people understand some new tools. So we bring in special guests, from other companies and other, people that have worked on like big virtual production sets to kind of give us some insight on how they work.